Good evening.
Blog
This is
Talk
Marsha
Radio.
Joiner. Good evening. This is Marsha Joiner with Betrayed by Hospice. And tonight our guest is Michele Chuvan. And her father was 78 when his life was hastened at that time. His name was Orvelle. So, Michele, I'm going to let you talk about it and tell your story.
All right. Thanks for having me on, Marsha.
Okay. I'm happy to have you.
Just kind of a brief history of his, medical issues up until, the day he died, which was November 14th, 2017. He was only 78. He lived at this particular assisted living home for about 3 years. And before his death, about 3.5 years before, he was diagnosed with ALS, which is commonly called Lou Gehrig's disease. It's one of those neurodegenerative diseases, kind of like Parkinson's or multiple sclerosis.
Right.
He had slow declines in like his muscle weakness in his legs, but he could still walk with a walker and stuff, with some help. But it mostly affected his what they call upper bulbar region, which is like your head and neck. So he had troubles with his speech. It kind of gradually declined over the years. He'd had a lot of slurring of his speech. Until, at the end, he couldn't form words at all. So, communication was very difficult as far as that goes. There was a lot of, pointing and, we had a dry erase board for him and stuff. So,
right.
But he also, had problems swallowing. His liquids, they had thickened, with the thicket. And, his food, it wasn't quite pureed, but it was, softened, enough where he, could swallow it easy. So that was his major diagnosis and, the cause of, a lot of his problems. But a few years before that, he had a pacemaker placed, so he had a bit of a heart issue. And he was borderline diabetic, too. So he wasn't on insulin or anything. He was, pretty much controlled by diet. So that's just kind of, his major medical issues. He was quite obese too. He was, right around 300 pounds usually. So he was a big guy.
Right. But he was very alert, right? His mental faculties are still there. Okay. And he lived by himself for many years.
Yes, he lived in his apartment until when he had, fallen, and he had a hip fracture, and then his heart issues, and then so that kind of precipitated him going into assisted living.
Okay. And what year was that?
The pacemaker and the hip fracture, that was like 2010.
Okay, but he lived by himself until, I believe you said 2014 was when he went into assisted living?
It was the end of 2012 that he had first gone into assisted living. He had to move in between there. He didn't quite like where he was, and we had found a different home that had kind of like a more apartment style. type room. So, he kind of liked that a little better. So we made a move there.
Okay,
and,
that's good.
Yeah, so and that was the home where he stayed until he died. So, and I guess it's a little bit of the history of the home. In the spring of 2017, it was sold, and there was, a big change in staff. The nurse that was there, she was very nice and helpful and everything. She was gone, I think, all but maybe 2 or 3 of the staff members. They were all gone, so it's like an entirely new staff of people were brought in, 2 new nurses. So,
okay.
Yeah, it was, after it was sold, to me anyway, it seemed to kind of go downhill. But anyway, not much I could do about that.
Well, did they change doctors at that time with the facility?
No, he had kept his primary care doctor.
Okay.
It's just the nurses at the home there changed.
Okay.
So,
okay.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
That's fine.
Okay. Yeah, so things were going, well during that time, and he started, it was maybe late summer or so, he had a couple falls, nothing real serious or anything, but his wheelchair was kind of in disrepair, and I had tried, getting that worked on, to kind of get repairs done, in order for Medicare to, pay for repairs, you have to go see your primary care doctor face-to-face. So we had an appointment made for that, so I showed pictures to the doctor of the wheelchair, and, he agreed that repairs need to be done, so he called into, the durable medical equipment place in town. He gave a prescription or whatever you call it that, repairs should be done.
Right.
So that took, quite a while because this place wasn't very responsive to me. So, yeah, so we had to go see the doctor anyway. So we did that. So it was during this time his money had, begun to get down there to the point where he would need to go on to Medicaid. So this was kind of the end of September, so there's a lot of paperwork involved in getting onto Medicaid.
Mm-hmm.
It was a lot of work. And as far as paying for his rent at the home, it was called community care. They're the ones that would, pay for most of his rent. We still had to pay a portion of it, but they would be responsible for the majority. So, so that's what I was working on. And toward the end of September, I had to call the assisted living home. Actually, I sent an email, and we had to draw his bank account down another $2,000, and then he would be, set for Medicaid. So I emailed the home asking, how many days would $2,000 get us for the next month's rent. So that would have been October, and I was told it would get us through 13 days. So from October 1st to the 13th, he would still be private pay, and then from the October 14th onward, it would be community care paying, and then he would be on Medicaid.
So $2,000 would cover him for 13 days.
Right.
Okay. So then he goes on to Medicaid, but he stayed at the same facility.
Right. Yep. He stayed in
the
same room. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I, sent in the check and everything, and it was all fine and everything, and it just kind of, went on. Community care paid and stuff. So, On October 5th, I got a call like 5:30 in the morning. He had a fall. I guess they were helping him to the bathroom, and he had lost his balance or tipped, or I'm not exactly sure how it went, but the home said that two people were helping him to the bathroom. So I get a call at 5:30 in the morning, and they had sent him to the emergency room. So we got ready and went to the home and got him a change of clothes in his wheelchair and stuff, and we headed to the ER. They did X-rays and stuff, and there was nothing broken, thankfully.
That was good.
Yeah, but it showed up. His previous hip fracture kind of showed up a little bit because they didn't do surgery on it, but it still showed up, I guess, a little bit. So, but he told him, well, that's an old fracture, so it's okay. But when they did other tests there, and they found he had a UTI, which he was kind of a bit prone to. So, I had asked his doctor to give him some cranberry tablets to kind of help prevent that a little bit. So.
Right.
But anyway, he had a UTI at that point, so they had him on IV antibiotics there in the ER, and some pain pills and stuff. He had abrasions, and he, I guess, on his face, he kind of fell into the bathroom door or whatever, so he had bruises on his face and
right.
sores on his legs and whatnot. So they were treating those. So they eventually discharged him from the ER that same day. I think it was, probably around lunchtime that we got back to the home. And they had given him a prescription for 10 days of antibiotics. So that's what he was sent home with. So, I got all the records, after he had died and stuff, and I seen that they had, they ordered the antibiotics the next morning on October 6th. So I get a call, I believe it was like October 9th or so. The ER wanted him to have a follow-up appointment with his primary doctor. So the
for the UTI.
Yeah, I don't know. Or just like a general,
okay.
How are you doing? Or I'm not really sure.
Okay.
But I get a call from the nurse at the home, and she was wondering, about the follow-up appointment because the ER had suggested it. And I just kind of, I told her that, I didn't, at the time, I didn't really see the point in going at that point, with him still being on, it was only 3 days on the antibiotics, and, if they did a urinalysis or anything, it would still show infection. So, I can just, his doctor was kind of I don't know, he didn't really do a whole lot, so I just kind of figured, he'd be one to say, well, just keep taking the antibiotics till they're done. Well, yeah, of course. That much I knew.
Right.
So, I told the nurse that, once he's done with the antibiotics and if his sores aren't healing, we'll go to the doctor. So it was, so she said, okay, fine, and she said they'll keep on, treating his wounds and stuff, dressing changes and whatnot. So it was, let's see, probably the next week, or was it later that week? No. Gosh, I'm getting a little lost here.
When the nurse called, on the 17th of October, the nurse had called to talk to you?
Yes.
Okay.
She left me a message. I was gone, and it was a message regarding the possibility of hospice. Because apparently she said she was talking to his doctor, and just that, how hospice came up, I wasn't really sure, but this was the message she had left me, that I should call her back and we can discuss hospice. And I didn't really know anything about hospice, what went on in hospice or anything. I knew it was for end of life, and I didn't know anybody who actually was ever on hospice, or so I had no idea what it was about.
Well, and you're expecting that they're going to take good care of him, and that if they're recommending it, that they know something you don't.
Yeah. But the message said I should call her back. So later that day when I got home, I called her back, and she said she was discussing with the doctor and stuff, and about hospice, if it would be a possibility. And I said, well, I thought hospice was for end of life. And then she says, as a quote, well, it is and it isn't. So I was kind of confused at that point.
Right. We all would be, right?
So then, she went on to say, it's kind of like this whole new team of people. There would be an extra nurse, some aides, for helping with his daily cares and stuff, and there's volunteers for, spending time and, whatever he would need. So I thought, I guess, I thought, well, if they're having problems, they're, dealing with, what he needs, I thought, well, having extra people around might be a good idea.
Exactly, and that's how they make you feel, that we're going to be doing this for your dad. We're going to be helping him more. Absolutely.
Yeah. So now I guess, she was talking, it wasn't really even a phone conversation. It was a fax letter that I have here, and, that I got after the fact in the records. It was a fax letter initiated by the home, wondering about hospice. So it's what, the doctor didn't bring it up or anything, but they did. But anyway, she said, I could talk to the hospice social worker, or, now that I think of it, he's more of a salesman than a social worker.
Right. I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So she said, she could get in have the hospice social worker get in touch with me. She kind of said, well, you can choose whatever hospice you like. She said they're all pretty much the same, which I guess was probably the one truth that was told to me.
Right. Of everything else, that would be true.
Yeah. But she said I could choose, whatever hospice, and, the particular hospice that I ended up choosing was kind of in a grouping with home health care and physical therapy. This is an outfit that he had already had physical therapy with, so, she said it would make for an easier intake because he had already, been in their system or whatever. So I didn't really know what an intake all involved, so I thought, well, if he's already, been with these people, then, I guess it wouldn't hurt.
Right. It wouldn't be. Now, he would stay in the same place that he was, though, right? And they would just come in?
Yes, they would come right to his room, even with the physical therapy, too. So, it was maybe, probably not even an hour later that the social worker had called me, and he, gave his pitch and everything, and he said this was, I think it was like a Thursday or so that I had talked to him. So he said, think about it over the weekend, and then, early next week, give me a call and let me know what you decide. So now I tried to do as much research as I could over the weekend. I Googled things, and I don't know, I guess I apparently didn't Google the right things.
Well, no, I think what you probably did is what most of us do. We Google hospice, and it comes up compassionate care for 6 months later, end of life. That's what they want us to see, and that, unfortunately, is all we see until we lose somebody like you did, your dad.
Yeah, and I even, like with ALS, I Googled hospice and ALS. Well, that came up all roses, too, all they could do for, a person with ALS. And so, during this time, too, I was talking with the physical therapist, regarding his wheelchair. And, we had kind of had a plan of what to do or how to, get his repairs done, because he wasn't Medicare eligible for a new wheelchair till the end of December. So we were just kind of trying to nurse the chair along till, it would get to be that point where he could get a new one.
Right.
So, we kind of come up with a plan, but he was, like, checking on costs and stuff. So that was something else that was kind of going on in the background there, too. So,
so they offered him a new chair. If you went with hospice, they would get him a new chair. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, they would get him a new wheelchair, a new mattress for his bed.
Yes, roses, right?
Yeah.
Promises of roses, right?
Yeah. So.
Okay. Now you met with the social worker.
Yes. I met. Let's see. It was October 24th. I don't remember if that was a Tuesday or a Wednesday, what day it was, but I signed papers on October 24th. We met. It was the social worker, me, and the nurse, the hospice nurse. So it was the three of us. We were in a conference room at the assisted living. They have like two buildings, so we were in a room in this building opposite of my dad's building. So we kind of talked a little bit, and the social worker kind of asked questions like where my dad was born, what he did for a living, church affiliation, stuff like that. And the nurse, she kind of asked more medical questions, his diagnosis and past medical history, stuff like that. And I told her at one point that I tried Googling research stuff, and she says to me, well, you probably found that they say we take pills away. And I said, well, no, I didn't really find anything like that. And then she says to me, no, we don't take pills away. Which was,
meaning the general medication?
Yeah.
Meaning the general medication he was already taking, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So I guess, at the time I thought it was kind of an interesting thing, but, I didn't really, think anything of it, but...
Mm-hmm.
And
so what did she tell you?
I'm sorry?
She told you that they don't take them away?
Right.
Okay.
that was the only thing she said to me as far as, when I said I was researching. So I thought, okay. So,
did they?
Yes.
Okay. So as you're seeing this, looking back on it now, you see that they said things to you that were not true. But
yeah,
you don't know it at the time.
No, I had no idea that they were going to give him new medications. I, didn't know they were going to take away medications. I mean, he was on, warfarin, the blood thinner, and some, blood pressure medications. Those they kept, but his others, he was on medication for gout and supplements and a few other medications. Those they all discontinued.
Jeez. You said they put him on other medications. Do you know what medications they started giving him?
Like I said, when I signed papers and all through, starting on hospice, I didn't know that they had ordered any new medications. I didn't see any kind of care plan. All I got was like a verbal, from the nurse, oh, we'll come, twice a week or, whatever it was, and the aides will come however many times a week. That's all I got as far as a care plan.
Jeez.
So,
okay.
But yeah, no, they had ordered, morphine, of course, and lorazepam.
Did you approve that?
No.
Did they ask you at that time? They didn't ask you. They just started it.
Nope. And the other thing was, I was my dad's power of attorney, and when I signed the papers, at that point, my power of attorney became activated, which means that he's considered incompetent to make medical decisions. So, just kind of an aside there. But no, they had not told me.
You're absolutely right to bring that up, because they have to have consent to start giving narcotics. And for them you had power of attorney, and not asking you if they could give him lorazepam and morphine is illegal to do that. They have to have consent.
Mm-hmm.
And you did not give consent, nor did you have knowledge until a time much later.
Yeah. And along with those, they ordered scopolamine, which is a patch that gets applied mostly to the side of your neck. And, it's a lot of people use it for, like, motion sickness, if they're flying on a plane or, have motion sickness in the car. But this was used for drying up secretions, because he had problems, with pooling of his saliva, so. Right.
Well, they do that for the phlegm, and they put that on my mom also. So.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. And just kind of doing some research, after the fact, that scopolamine's pretty powerful as far as, sedating, and it's
absolutely
out as bad as morphine.
Absolutely, and they don't tell you any of this. And, as you said, you didn't find out until you started reading the medical records what they had actually given your dad during this time frame. So when you went to see him, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say a couple other ones that they ordered was atropine and hyoscyamine, which they're for drying up secretions too, but, their side effects are just like, scopolamine and morphine. So, and then while they had discontinued his, he had prescriptions for oxycodone and hydrocodone, for worse pain. So, but those they had discontinued.
That just really makes me angry, because they were giving him a lot of these drugs that they give him are called black box drugs, and they're giving it without your consent, and they do cause a lot of bad side effects. Dizziness, nausea, blurred vision. I mean, things that they should not be doing to an elderly person who is completely helpless at whatever they're giving them.
Right. Mhm.
So I am so sorry. I understand exactly how you feel.
Mhm.
So is he still able to communicate with you at this point? Because we're this is at the end of October, the beginning of November?
Yeah, end of October. When we would go visit him, I could tell there was something was different. He seemed more, withdrawn and just not, usually, if we have TV on and something funny would happen, he'd laugh, and the one he enjoys watching sports. He's a big football fan, baseball and all that. So on Sundays when we would go, it would be football day.
Right.
And so the Sunday we were there, we had a game on, and something funny happened during the game, and my husband and we were laughing, and I could tell my dad I could tell he wanted to laugh, but he couldn't. I could see it in his face that he wanted to, but and I didn't know what was going on.
Mhm. Absolutely.
I didn't know if he was just kind of having a bad day, or because like I said, before the first time we had gone and seen him, they had given him scopolamine patch, and that alone would have sedated him enough that I could tell that there was something wasn't right. But then they started in with the morphine and the other drugs. So yeah, there was according to the records and stuff, he had kind of gradually lessened his eating. There was never, there was like a cup of water in his room, but there was no way he could, get to it to, take a drink or anything, and there was, no hydration unless there was somebody there to, give him the cup with the straw.
Right.
And as far as
did
food
you
goes,
try? Was he able to swallow if you tried to give him some? Could he? At that point?
Yeah. One of my cousins and her son came to visit, and she had brought a bowl of rice pudding that he always liked. It was my grandma's recipe, and it was like the day before he died. He ate the entire container.
Oh, so he was enjoying that, sure.
Oh, yes, definitely. Yeah, she would feed it to him, and I would, give him his water. I could tell when he'd look at the cup. Well, then I know. Oh, you want some water? Then he'd shake his head, yes.
Right. So he's still aware of what's going on.
Yes, he knew. Well, my cousin's kid is a priest. And the one day we were visiting there with them, and we said prayers and stuff, and he could make the sign of the cross and stuff, and he couldn't speak the prayers, but he knew what was going on.
Oh, absolutely.
But,
so this is now we're at the very beginning of November, and that's when you started noticing that he wasn't enjoying the TV, wasn't laughing, and didn't really seem like he was alert and watching TV. Yeah,
he seemed very withdrawn. And that this wheelchair that hospice had given him was just, I never seen anything like it. They called it a Broda chair. To me, it kind of looked like, those chairs from the old horror films for the, the electrical chairs. It had a real high back on it, and I couldn't figure out how to even move it around.
Was he getting in the wheelchair, or was he, when you would go in to see him, was he always in the bed, or he would be sitting in the wheelchair?
He would be in the wheelchair until, like, the weekend before he died. Then he was always in bed.
Okay.
So, yeah, apparently, they could figure out how to move it around, but I sure couldn't.
Right. Yeah, I don't think I've seen one like that.
Yeah, it's, maybe you could Google it or something and see what it is, but it's just, I had never seen one like that before.
Can you spell that?
Yeah.
Broda?
B as in brother,
Uh-huh.
R-O-D as in David, A.
Oh, Broda. Okay. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I will. I'll look that up.
Yeah. So,
okay, so now tell me about you said he had a pacemaker and the chaplain had come in?
Yes. Well, there's a chaplain associated with the hospice, and the one day the chaplain was there, and my dad had with the pacemaker. He had a monitor in his room for if something would happen with the pacemaker, then that monitor would send an alert to the doctor's office. So there was the one day the chaplain was there, and in the notes here he said that my dad kept looking at the monitor, and so the chaplain just kind of he asked him if he was afraid that it was going to shock him. I don't know what my dad's answer was. Apparently it was yes. I don't know. But the chaplain had told the nurse at the home, and I guess at that point they gave him a lorazepam. So, and after, when looking through the notes from the doctor's office, it was maybe a day or two before that, in the record there showed an alert came through. It was noted in the doctor's notes. Exactly what it was, I don't know, because you have to go into this other program for getting the medical records. I'm not real sure how that all works, but there was something came through, but apparently it was never relayed to the home because the chaplain, he had the nurse look through the records, and there was no mention of anything with the pacemaker. So my dad must have known something was with it, but he couldn't communicate what it was, and nothing was said from the doctor's office. So
well, that's probably why he was looking over at the monitor, because I don't know if he'd felt a skip, or I don't know how pacemakers work, but he probably knew something and was trying to communicate it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something.
And the chaplain
happened.
just didn't get it, and nobody alerted anybody to it.
Nope.
So what did they do? They gave him a lorazepam, and then what did they do?
I suppose they gave him a lorazepam because they figured he was anxious.
Mm-hmm. I think I might be. If there was an alert on it, he probably felt something.
Yeah.
So did they take that monitor out? Or
no,
were they?
That stayed in his room. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So.
Okay.
Yeah. Otherwise, the day before he died, he was able to eat and drink some. But the next morning it was completely different. He didn't. I brought him oatmeal. He didn't want any. When I got there were 2 aides. They had when I looked, they had like little sponges on sticks, and they had them in his mouth. So I suppose they were soaking up secretions or whatever. I didn't know at the time what they were doing, but and
right. I don't think I would have known either. They had sponges in his mouth?
Yeah, it looked like little sponges on sticks. So they were kind of, slobbing around in his mouth. So
okay.
That's what they were doing when I got there. So I sat by his bedside for, quite a while, and he just I don't know if he knew I was there, But I just, I sat and I just held his arm and I just told him I was sorry, that this wasn't what I signed up for.
He knew that you were there for him and that you loved him and you had done absolutely everything you could. I mean, you went and visited him all the time, and you did the research that you thought would give you the right answers.
I guess I was just, really, I thought things were going to carry on just as they were, and I was so mad leaving there that day. I just, all I could do was pound on the steering wheel of my van.
Right, right.
But, while I was there, one of the aides came in too, and, he couldn't close his mouth at all. It's just like his mouth was just, it's this
right.
round circle that just was always open. He couldn't close his mouth at all.
Right.
And when I was there, one of the aides came in and she said was, "No, buddy, got some medicine for you." And she dropped some medicine in his mouth, and I was just I wanted to ask what it was, but I was just I was just crying
because you feel so defenseless, and you know something's wrong, but you don't know what it is, and you don't know what to do about it, because you're trusting that they're doing and saying honest things to you, and they're not. And that is the danger of us trusting them. And I mean, that's the reason you're hitting the nail on the head. The reason that we have the shows, that we do this, and that there's so much talk about it now, to warn other people so they don't go through what we and thousands of other people have gone through. You did your best, Michele. I mean, you were there for him. You believed what they said because they're convincing. And what we've heard about hospice is it's compassionate.
Yeah.
That's what we believe.
Like I said, I had no clue about anything with hospice other than, people went to hospice when it was, their time. But I don't know what went on in hospice, if what drugs were ordered, if there was even new drugs ordered. I was completely clueless.
And there was no consent for the drugs they gave him. And there is no consent in the majority of the cases. The families are like you were, like we were. You don't know, and you trust that they're doing the right thing.
And, since he died, I found out, I could have revoked hospice when I, thought, something wasn't right. But that, I didn't know I could. They never told me, how I should go about doing that. All they told me was, if I have a problem with something, I should come to them first. Well, I thought, I felt kind of intimidated at that point.
Exactly. And they've told you this is going to be better. We're going to have more people around the clock to help your dad. We're going to get him a new chair. We're going to get him a new bed. We don't stop giving them the medicines that he's already taking. They did. Mm-hmm. They've never discussed with you that they were going to start giving him lorazepam, morphine, the patches. They didn't discuss that with you. So you absolutely had no idea when you signed the paper what was going to happen. And many years ago when hospice first started, that is the way that it was. They did do those things, and they did not hasten someone's death. Mm-hmm. Now, sadly, that is what they do. Now, one of the things that you and I had talked about on that particular, and you're in Michigan, one of the things is the Wisconsin. I'm sorry. Why did I say okay. Michigan? Wisconsin. My brother-in-law is from Wisconsin. I'm sorry. But the owner of the assisted living was also part owner of that hospice. Was that right?
Yes, I found that out since too. Yep.
So he had a vested interest in you going with that hospice and keeping your dad in that facility. So that was another one of the little arm twists that they do.
Yeah.
He can stay right here in his bed. Everything will be just the same that it is. He'll continue to get help.
And with going on Medicaid now, the community care, do they pay the amount he was paying by private pay? I highly doubt that. If they take care of paying for everybody, who's on Medicaid in like nursing homes and assisted livings, I mean, that's a lot of money. I can't imagine that they pay the full amount. I just, the whole timing to me was very odd, when, him going on to Medicaid and then all of a sudden, hospice is brought up. It was just very odd to me.
Well, he ran out of money. He ran out of, like you say, the amount of money that he was going to be paying them. So there was no more money they could get out of him. He was going to start costing money.
Right. No, he needed more help.
Point.
Well, then there wasn't as many, the staff couldn't help him as much. So, yeah, maybe losing money.
Right. And he was taking up a bed. And, I don't know that particular one, if they had people, waiting in line. I don't know if there was a mass turnover in that particular facility. And unfortunately, we don't know what they're thinking when they're doing this, and we're just trusting that we're doing the best for our loved ones.
Yeah.
And I think, last week we had Carol Herman on, and we were talking about, different things you could do. And sadly, as much research as we do, the best we can do is to know when they, like you said with your dad, that he started acting differently. He didn't seem like he was engaged. And, once we know that, but again, when you signed the papers, you had no idea that they were going to do this, and then when it started happening, you didn't know what was happening, and you didn't know how to get out of it.
Right, yeah, definitely.
And that is the game that they play with our loved ones' lives.
Yeah. And, with all the records that I've got, I got a copy of the fax letter, where hospice was brought up in the first place. It said, when I had told the nurse, that I didn't want to, take him to a follow-up appointment right away until his antibiotics were done. In this letter to his doctor, the nurse at the home says, and quote here, daughter/POA Michelle relates she does not feel there's anything else to do for Orville. Now, I never, ever said I didn't think there was anything else they could do. I just wanted to delay going to the doctor's appointment.
Until he was finished with the antibiotics.
Right.
And
then, it says, in your opinion, would you consider Orville a candidate for hospice? And I just cannot believe, when I first read that, I just died. I just couldn't believe she twisted my words around like that.
So the nurse from the facility that he was at went to the doctor and told the doctor there was nothing else that they could do for him, and in essence she was saying you were recommending that he go to hospice, or that she had discussed it with you somehow. Yeah,
and then this was on October 9th. This letter was October 9th, and she didn't call me until the next week. And then, the doctor scribbles in the corner, yes, would consider hospice if daughter agrees. So, his primary care doctor never examined him, and the hospice doctor never examined him. I just, you need to see the doctor for everything else Medicare related except for hospice. Then you can just,
make
go
that
on a
decision.
recommendation.
From a nurse.
Yeah.
From a nurse. That seems to be. The nurses seem to be a lot more culpable in making the decisions. Yes, in my mom's situation, it was like that as well. The nurse made the decision, and you were lied to, and it's just an unfortunate thing. Did you try after that to check with an attorney or with anybody to report it to anybody, or you were just so shocked when it did happen?
Well, I found like the email to the state ombudsman for long-term care, to report abuse and stuff like that. I wrote to them once. They referred me to a different department, and I said, I believe it's a conflict of interest to own an assisted living home and a hospice. I mean, both sides of your bread are going to get buttered.
Exactly.
But the state feels that there's nothing against owning both, so I guess I was nothing I could do that way.
And sadly, that is true. I believe that's what most of us have found out on the Facebook site, Murdered by Hospice. There's another Facebook site, Hidden Realities of Hospice. So there are several sites out there that are addressing the same type of concerns. And we all know it's happening, but sadly, there is nothing being done about it. I'm hoping with the situation in Ohio, they found out that he's hastened the death of, I believe it's up to 34 people now, and they are looking into that. He's been, pulled off of his doctor responsibilities. There's the case, Novus, case in Texas. So I believe that we're starting to hear more about hospice hastening people's deaths. And I believe that we are going in the right direction. There is a movement, and I think that we just have to continue to tell our stories and let the people know who don't know to, this is the homework that we didn't do because we trusted when you first Google that it says they're compassionate care. Yeah. And that's, go ahead. And,
I guess, my advice to anyone that, feels they need to put, their loved one in a facility, just as often as you can, get the records, maybe once every 2 weeks or whatever, at least, the nurse's notes, especially if you can't be there all the time, get those nurse's notes so you know what goes on from day to day, and, like their medication list, because they can, discontinue and add medications without you knowing it.
Well, that's a very good point, Michelle. I had not thought about that, but if you notice something's wrong, if you go in at that point and, I want the medical records, and you had the power of attorney, so you certainly had the right to get the records.
Yeah, and even, like after doctor's appointments, too, I would, a day or two after the appointment, the records should be ready, read them over, and so you know what the doctor is thinking, and, I just get the records as often as you can.
Right. With that, something Marty had said a couple of weeks ago, that the HIPAA law that is out there is to protect the doctors and not the patients. And if the doctor makes notes on the records, handwritten notes on the patient's records, then he can say he won't give those to you. So it puts us in the position of having to say, I don't want you to handwrite notes on my dad's records so that you can get the records. Yeah. And that's part of what HIPAA's doing.
Oh, yeah.
So the other thing, I'm assuming that your dad had a DNR?
Yes.
Okay. Because I think hospice will not accept a person if they don't have a DNR, but that's one thing that we've been telling people, make sure you have a good medical power of attorney, as solid as it can be, have it notarized, and don't sign a do not resuscitate because it puts you at risk of the doctors and as in your case with your dad, the nurse making the decision that, we're going to end this person's life.
Right, yes, definitely.
So
I guess, just one other piece of advice that I wish I would have done is have a camera in the room. When his fall there at the beginning of October, the home said that, he was being helped by two people when he fell, but the EMTs told the doctor that it was an unwitnessed fall. So, I don't know which story got mixed up or by whom, but, to have, cameras in the room, it wouldn't have been any doubt. And, especially if falls started happening, well, is it, the person falling, or is it, the caregivers being negligent, or, you just want to know.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's a point, too. And I think you would probably have to, I don't know if you could install a camera and, if it's Wi-Fi or however you're doing it, but I don't know that you could install a camera without them knowing it, but certainly, you could ask that. That would be something we would have to, research. Maybe I'll check into that to see so that on the next show we might have that information. But you just have to be careful, and that's kind of what I guess you're saying to our listeners now is to be careful and request the medical records while they're in the facility. And if you notice that they're starting to act different or, be sluggish, lethargic, then request the medical records at that time so you can see what kind of drugs are they giving them and how frequently they're giving them to him.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
So it is just a sad state of affairs when people make the decision that someone's life is no longer useful, valid, and they decide to take that life away from them.
Yeah, and I even though he was, declining slowly, he would more than likely be here today yet.
He could have lived. He might have lived another month, 2 months. They don't know that because they took that away from him.
Yeah.
So they don't know that. Michele, I appreciate you telling your story to us. I know it was painful for you, but hopefully it will help other people that are listening, and that they might be able to save their loved ones, and that's why we do this.
I hope so, definitely.
So is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, I guess, I just got my little bit of advice out there for anybody who thinks their loved one should go into a facility. So, just
okay. And sometimes we don't.
Records.
Right, and sometimes we don't have a choice. Next Wednesday, Carly Walden will be coming back on and doing her show on Wednesday, the same topic of hospice, hidden realities of hospice. So if you tune in next week, you'll hear Carly Walden. And I believe that we're probably out of time and will be clicked off momentarily.
Okay.
I should have said in the beginning, and I will next time, that if you have a comment or question, if you hit the number 1, then you will go into a queue, and Marty will bring you in. So I will make sure I mention that next time.
Okay, are we all done there?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thanks everybody for tuning in. And Michele, thank you for your story, and I'm so sorry about your father.
Thank you, Marty.
People pay attention. This is important information, and Marsha and Carly will be giving you information about how to avoid hospice, what your rights are in hospice, and you need to listen to these shows and tell your friends about them too, because there's a lot of information here. When you find out you weren't the only one this happened to, it's like a light bulb going off what exactly did happen. Until then, everyone, thanks for tuning in, and we will be back next week. See you, everybody.
Bye-bye. Good evening. This is Marsha.